Welcome to the Trainer's Bullpen, where trainers in the law enforcement space come to hear the experts talk about their work, experience, and research into human performance, particularly as it relates to the critical aspects of training motor learning and adaptive decision-making. The purpose of the Trainer's Bullpen is to bridge the gap between law enforcement training and the findings of academic research and current pedagogical best practice. Our desire at the Trainer's Bullpen is to help advance law enforcement training, make research applied, and improve officer and public safety. The Trainer's Bullpen is a production of Raptor Protection, and I'm Chris Butler, your host. Today, it's my pleasure to welcome back to the show Dr. Adam Nichols. Adam is a professor of psychology at the University of Hull, United Kingdom. The main focus of his research relates to the psychosocial factors that predict doping among adolescent athletes, along with coping and emotion among athletes. He is also interested in whistleblowing and is currently leading an international consortium that is examining factors that influence whether individuals will report wrongdoing. Additionally, Adam has provided psychological support to athletes and coaches ranging from grassroots to elite level. Dr. Nichols has published more than 85 journal articles and written 5 books. His book, Psychology for Coaches, Theory and Practice, has also been translated into Arabic and Hungarian. Adam's most recent publication is the 3rd edition textbook, Psychology in Sports Coaching, Theory and Practice, published in 2022 by Routledge. Outside of work, Adam has been training in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for over 6 years. He won silver at the 2021 British Open in gi and bronze at the 2022 no-gi British Open. Competing provides Adam with the opportunity to test the practical application of different psychological skills. Adam, welcome back to the Trainer's Bullpen.
Yeah, it's great to be back. Just thinking about the BJJ journey. I'm competing again at the British Open on July the 14th. All being well, assuming I make the weight cut and everything for my weight category. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to that.
Oh, that's fine. And is that going to be in gi or no gi?
Yeah, it's in gi again.
Okay.
So yeah.
All right. Well, we'll follow that closely.
Yeah, nice one.
So for our listeners, if you haven't had the opportunity, the last time Dr. Nichols was on the show, he spoke about mental imagery, and we spoke about his research and the chapters out of his book that discuss mental imagery. Would encourage you to go back and take a listen to that one as well. But today we're talking about mental toughness, performer mental toughness. And so we're excited to go through some of your material out of your textbook and have a broader conversation, Adam, about mental toughness. And maybe just to start out, well, let's put a definition around that. What mental toughness is, and and you can distinguish that from other terms like resilience. Are they related? Are they different? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
So what is mental toughness? What do we mean when we say that?
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting, Chris, because there's a variety of definitions of what it is. There's lots of misunderstanding, heated debates within the literature. But essentially, it's about our ability to be able to manage stress and perform well. So that is, mentally tough people or people who score high in mental toughness are able to manage stress when performing and not let the stress impede their performance. So then when you think about, is it related to other constructs? You mentioned resilience. I think if you had an individual who scored high in mental toughness, they would also score high in resilience. I think it'd be very difficult to kind of distinguish between the two when they're out in a performance setting, whether that's law enforcement, sport, given a presentation. They're pretty much, I would argue, one and the same thing in terms of what they are, because resilience is about your ability to be able to maintain psychological well-being following a difficult situation, so they're very, very similar, and also just had a thought about, we published a paper back in 2015, and there was a very, very high correlation between the two constructs with I think, I can't remember the sample that we had, but it was a few hundred athletes anyway, so.
Okay. So when it comes to mental toughness then, is this something, because this is very important for law enforcement officers, that will go from basically zero pressure, they'll be performing their duties, responding to calls, doing traffic enforcement, whatever it is, and so there's very minimal pressure for the most part in I hate to use the word routine, but the ongoing daily activities that an officer conducts. But then they may, without any prior warning, spontaneously find themselves in an incredibly high pressure performance environment. And so, for trainers, law enforcement trainers and coaches, mental toughness, the ability to maintain that good focus, attention, engagement in the task, solve problems, be adaptable, is critically important. And maybe the difference not between winning a medal or not, but literally between life and death. So I guess what I want to ask you first, Adam, is in the academy or in training, do our people already come in with a degree of inherent mental, like, is it something you either have or don't have? Is it something that can be developed? And if it can be developed, then in what ways can coaches and trainers create an environment where mental toughness can be increased and improved? What's your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of really interesting things to unpick from that. I guess one of them is that like you mentioned about being a police officer, and you have, like you say, the routine elements, and all of a sudden you have one very high pressure situation. And if you contrast that to sport, normally in sport it's a process in which the levels of competition get higher and higher and higher. You don't just suddenly go from being a club player to competing at the Olympics. So you get time, and that's where I think it's different for law enforcement, emergency responders. And I think that's one thing that trainers need to consider. So another question was about whether do people have differing levels of mental toughness. If we take society as a whole, I imagine there will be a broad range of mental toughness among all the cadets. And I think some of their previous life experiences may have put them in situations where they're able to develop mental toughness. So if they played, sport, for example, where you probably do need to develop your own mental toughness. And then also, yes, there is evidence that we can enhance and develop the mental toughness of people. So there's, some published research out there to suggest that, certainly in a sporting setting anyway, which you think would be transferable to all settings.
So how then, like, what are ways that coaches and trainers can help build and enhance their students' mental toughness? When you looked at the research and you published your chapter, are there things that coaches and trainers can do? And obviously none of them would do it intentionally, but I'm sure there's things that we can do that can hinder the development of mental toughness, and there's things that we can intentionally do that can maybe optimize our students' mental toughness. What do you find? What do you see in the research around these concepts?
So in terms of developing mental toughness, I think there was a really good study by Bell, published in 2013, where they conducted a 2-year mental toughness intervention with English cricket players. And what they did, which I think was really interesting, and they would expose the players to differing levels of pressure and stress. And the way in which they would do this is have consequences for maybe not performing well. So that the consequences were things such as additional fitness sessions, cleaning the dressing room, things that you might not necessarily want to do, but there were consequences, and that that helped create pressure situations. So that's one thing that you can do in training, is create pressure situations. And I think the next thing, so I think lots of coaches probably do that very well among all different settings. However, the most important thing from my perspective is, in addition to that, is you teach people mental skills that they can use, particularly coping skills that they can use and practice during training when you're increasing pressurized situations. Because we know that if we look at coping is something that it takes time to develop and practice. The more often you do it, the better you become at it. So for these reasons, within training situations, what I think would be a good idea would be to expose people to differential levels of stress, and you increase the levels of stress and pressure over time as the resources that you teach the cadets, the training, law enforcement officers increases. So you're getting this, you're providing challenging situations, and as they can meet the challenging demands of that situation, you increase the challenge, and then they would increase their resources, increase the challenge again. But the key is that you're giving the individuals an opportunity to feel what it's like to perform under pressure and to test the resources you're teaching them, because different coping strategies will work better or worse for different people, and it's about individuals finding out what works for them and then practicing that in different situations. I think that's one thing that's really, really important, and a really important way of developing mentally tough behaviours under pressure, and I'm a big fan of that.
So that exposure to pressure and stress, is there, like, how do you manage optimizing the correct amount of pressure that you put your people under? Because I can imagine when it comes to mental toughness, can you not perhaps also create the opposite effect by putting your people under too much pressure too soon? So what's the dangers in that, and how would a trainer or coach know what's the right amount of pressure for my student?
So first and foremost, a danger of this, which has been shown in the research, is that individuals can perceive that they're being bullied, that they're put in situations which are unfair, that they can't deal with, that they maybe had more pressure put on them than other people. So, and I think when you're creating these pressurized situations, it's really important that you explain the importance of this, why you're doing it, and why it'll be beneficial to the individuals upon graduating and working in the field. So this is a really interesting point. How do you manage the level of pressure? And I don't think there's an easy way of doing this. It's about monitoring the responses. So as a trainer, you need to know the individual first and foremost. You need to know how they would normally react or under situations which are not pressurized, and then you would then observe them when you start increasing the. What I would do is you've got to start with just slight increases in pressure. So that could be timing. So give them a bit less time than what they would normally have. Maybe make the challenge a little bit more difficult, but don't do this all in one go. Just ramp up the difficulty over time and then monitor the individuals. And what you'll find is, I think, from working with athletes, is some athletes absolutely thrive under pressure. For some athletes, they need this pressure to get the best out of them, whereas others really struggle. They certainly struggle at first, but with time they can improve. And that's one thing that really interests me, is that why certain people, thrive under these difficult situations, and others don't. But we do know that we can help everyone get to that level. And what you might find as a trainer is that maybe 2 or 3 individuals within a class who are really struggling, and for those you would just tone down the challenge a little bit and maybe provide them with more support. And particularly as well, we know that coaches play a key role in developing mental toughness through the way they interact with individuals. And in particular, evidence shows that if a coach or a trainer fulfills the basic psychological needs of an athlete, that is the need to feel cared for, the need to feel effective in what they do, and giving them a sense of control, they contribute to the development of mental toughness, and they're really important. So, for example, if you have an individual who is not reacting well to a pressure situation you've created, it might be you take them aside, you speak to them, look, we're doing this for these reasons, I think you've got the potential to be a really good officer, we just need to work on this. So what you're doing is you're fulfilling the basic psychological needs by showing them you care for them, you're showing them or you're telling them that you think they've got potential. They just need to work on these aspects, whatever they may be, of performing under pressure, and then they will, fulfill the potential. So you're doing it in a kind of, it's a tough but caring way, if you see what I mean. It's tough that you're creating pressure for them, but you're doing it in a way that comes from a good place. And I think it's really important that you explain that to them, why you're doing what you're doing and the benefits it can be. And when delivering feedback, it's about telling the individuals the feedback is coming from a place of them developing. That's really important, and all these things contribute to them building their confidence levels, building their capacity to perform under pressure. Because I think when you're performing under pressure, certainly at the start, when for the first time you're engaging in any pressure-based training, is that you need, if you think that your coach doesn't rate your ability or continuously criticising you, that adds on an extra layer of pressure, which for some people, particularly at the start of any training, would be too much. So the positivity and the support from a coach, particularly at the beginning, is important. At least have one person that would offer that support. Excuse the pun, but you might have a good cop, bad cop. You might have the person who is there to really ramp it up. But as long as they have someone else who can then support them and help them, then that's of vital importance, because we know that level of support is related to mental toughness.
And what you just mentioned there, maybe you can build on, because as I read through the related chapters in your book on mental toughness, it seems to me that the relationship, so the coach-performer relationship, it was rated by athletes as being incredibly important to their self-confidence, to their creation of this mental toughness, is that feeling of being supported. And so I think what I took away from that, Adam, is that there needs to be a lot of work done by a coach to create a culture of support and relationship with the performer, because when you do have to provide that critical feedback and point out areas of weakness where your people need to improve, like isn't it important that critique or criticism is kind of wrapped around a whole culture of that they already feel that you have their best interest at heart, that you support them, that there's relationships. So help me understand the importance of that relationship.
Yeah, the relationship you have is of vital importance, and what in particular it's important that the individual trusts the coach or the trainer, and without that level of trust, it can be very, very difficult. Nick Saban, I love watching all videos with Nick Saban, and he says no one cares what you know until they know that you care, and it is so true. People want to feel cared for. They want to know that you have their best interests. So you've got to do that, and that can take time. It takes, and I think the central to that is you get to know each other. I get to know you as the coach, as a trainer. You get to know me. You get to know under what conditions I work well under what conditions I don't work well under, I think it's also of vital importance that you get to know the individual and their circumstances, their family life, and because you don't know what's going on in their family life, and that will certainly impact their performance. So an example being is that you have an individual who, you know, normally performs very well during training, and then one day they have a really bad, or they have a bad few weeks. And if you don't know what's going on in their family life, you don't understand why that is, which then would maybe impact your behaviour towards them. Whereas if you know they're having relationship difficulties, they've got problems maybe with their family or whatever it may be, you can then understand that and then maybe change the way you behave, or in those situations offer some more support. And by doing that, you will actually have a massive impact on the well-being of the individual, because you're supporting them and, you know, you're making them feel cared for, and that will actually in itself have a stress buffering effect. It will reduce some of the stress too. Because I think there's often a misconception that if you're a caring coach or leader, that you can't have high standards. Well, no, but you can, and that is vitally important. You have high standards, but actually, by being a caring leader, you will enhance the performance of individuals by reducing the levels of stress. And it's for those reasons, it's of vital importance that individuals feel supported. From my perspective, anyway, that's how I see it.
Right. No, that's very good. So you spoke in your textbook here. You were talking about. I'll just read this. Coaches should attempt to foster a mastery climate as opposed to a performance climate, and this is in relation to coach behavior that can lead to enhancing mental toughness. So, what do you mean? So, if I'm a trainer and I want to focus on creating a mastery climate in training rather than a performance climate, what does that look like?
Yeah. So there are two main climates. And these are, in sport, they're coach initiated. Within a law enforcement setting, they're instructor created. You, the instructor, creates the environment through the way in which you reward success and the way in which you talk about failure. And there are two main environments. So in a mastery environment, the leader rewards and promotes effort and improvement and teamwork. So feedback might be some things such as, right, that's really good today, you've improved this particular aspect by 10%, 20%, that's really good, or this session you've tried really, really hard, keep this effort up. So you're praising effort and improvement. Whereas in the other type of climate, which is a performance climate, you reward the best people in a class. So if you've got a law enforcement class with cadets, you just praise the best 2 or 3. And it gets worse. Not only do you only praise the best 2 or 3, you make them compete against each other regularly, and then your regard for them is based on how they perform. So if they perform well in a test, you be friendly with them and jolly with them. But those who don't, you just ignore them and are mean to them and shower them and punish them. And they're the difference. So one promotes growth and is self-referenced, and the other is about evaluating performance based on your position within a group of individuals. So it's normative. And they have a massive impact on things such as engagement, anxiety, well-being, performance. But what I would like to add, there's always a little caveat somewhere, and we know that in sport, in elite sport anyway, that elite individuals do like a little bit of competition between themselves. They like to judge themselves in relation to their peers. So it's not to say that we take away all competition, but it's about knowing the situation. And if you're working with an elite group of individuals, then you may have some competition. But still, the essence of the climate that you create should be a mastery-based climate, where you're focusing on improvement and you're getting people to have self-reference goals. So their goals are to, if it's within mental toughness, it's to be better than they were at dealing with pressurised situations, coping more effectively than what they previously did, not comparing themselves to other people. Or you would never want people to have a goal of, oh, I don't want to be the worst in the class today. I don't mind if I'm in the bottom, 20%, but I don't want to be the worst. And people do have those types of goals. So, and it's about getting people away from that and focusing more on themselves and being self-referenced.
So you used that term a couple times there in that explanation, self-reference or self-reference goals. So what does that mean? If a person has a high degree of self-reference, what is that, and what is the opposite of that?
Yeah, so self-reference would be all your goals are related to your own standards of performance. So, for example, if you're doing shooting training, it would be to improve on your previous efforts or improve on your personal best. Your goals relate to yourself. Whereas other goals, so if normative goals would be like, right, in this group, I want to be in the top 3 out of these 10 shooters. And the danger with that is that you might not have to perform to your best. Your standards could slip, but you could still be in the top percentile. So it's not about improvement. It's not about, and that's where we want people to always feel like and have goals related to self-improvement, not comparing themselves to other people. And if you're in an environment which is mastery, athletes or people are much more likely to have these self-referenced, self-improvement goals and not less likely to compare themselves to others, because the leaders and the coaches set the tone and set what is important. And if it's important to improve and put in maximum effort, then people naturally develop those types of those goals.
So are those the mastery and performance environment, Adam? Would those be related? Are they similar concepts to like intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation then? And I know you talked about that in your chapter on self-determination theory.
What they do is they lead to the types of motivation that a person will have. So if you're in an environment, if you're the coach or the leader, and you create an environment in which a mastery environment in which effort and improvement is rewarded, people are much more likely to have intrinsic motivation. So they're doing things for the enjoyment. Whereas if you're in a performance environment, people are much more likely to have extrinsic motivation, focusing on wanting to do things for the sake of others, for winning, for rewards that they may get, and less so for the enjoyment. It diminishes enjoyment when you're in a performance climate. And we also know as well that individuals in the performance climate secrete more or have more cortisol in their saliva, which is an indication of stress. It's a stress hormone. So again, it's another reason why it promotes this anxiety, because you're always focused on things that you can't control. You can't control the performance of others, but you can control your own performance and how that relates to how you previously performed. So yeah, for those reasons, I think it is really important.
Okay. In your comments here, you talk about, you say it is crucial that coaches create an environment that pushes players to try their hardest. So when they are in those competitive matches, they will be used to performing in challenging situations. So what I'm taking away from that then, and how it relates to mental toughness, is so there is a critical relationship between I guess the contextual accuracy of the performance environment or the practice environment, and how that relates or doesn't relate to the actual performance environment. Is that what you're referring to there?
Yeah, that's so important. The training environment and the situation needs to be as close to possible as the actual situation. And we know in a sporting context it's not always the case. There's quite a large discrepancy between training and matches. And so as a coach or as a leader within law enforcement, it's about using your imagination, using the resources you have to try and get the training and the situation as close as possible. There's a really nice example actually from the UFC fighter Sean O'Malley the other week. So in training, he had one of his last sparring rounds before his World Championship fight. He made the environment as close to the UFC fight as possible. So what he did is he had his ring walk music on. He did a ring walk down to where he was sparring, just like he would in the real situation. He had a small crowd there. He had the Vaseline rubbed on like he would. He did his meditation while he was in the cage, the octagon. He didn't speak to his opponent. They played in crowd music or crowd noise. So that there was as close to the fight as possible within training. It replicated exactly. The length of the rounds were the same. And that's really important. It's like this stress exposure training, exposing people to stress. So it just gave him a sense of feeling of what it will be like, and he'll know what it'll be like. He's been a former world champion himself. He's done it. But even it shows you that even if someone as experienced as him is valuing this and is doing this, it shows that it's something that we should all be doing preparing for pressurized situations. And I thought that was just a really, really good example of a way of making training as like it would be in a real life situation. It's interesting, like when I look at, you look at people when they're doing shooting training, in the sense that they may hold one position and fire lots of shots, but would the reality of that be in a real life situation? And probably not. So it's like how you make any training situation relevant or applicable to what it would be in real life is of vital importance.
What struck me in the example that you just gave there, Adam, is all of the, so when we think about the accuracy or the fidelity of the practice environment to the performance environment, you described not only like the actual task itself, but even like the auditory similarities, the olfactory similarities, the full, I guess, multi-sensorial reality is making that as contextual as possible across all of those domains, not just the task itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And because Sean O'Malley could have just stood in the ring and had the noise, but he made it everything, probably like even like having his hands wrapped the same way, being in a change room before, because that's what he did. He came out and did this ring walk when he was in training. So making it as realistic as possible, including all of the senses, all of the environment, and I think if we can do that, or the closer we can get to what it would be like to perform for real, the better it is.
And do you think that, like, mental imagery, because I know you're a huge proponent of mental imagery training, I can, I imagine, or I recall often watching really skilled law enforcement trainers take their students through a guided imagery session before or after an actual physical practice or training, and using all of those senses in the imagery, right? What it smells like, what it sounds like, what it feels like, and just bringing that whole experience alive. So is there research that also supports the use of mental imagery in building mental toughness as well?
Yeah, so we looked at, I published a study way back in 2008 now, and we found that there's a link between mental toughness levels and mental imagery. So that is, those who are more mentally tough used more mental imagery naturally. It wasn't something that they were taught. But what I would say, just going back to the Sean O'Malley example, is that you would want people to use mental imagery in and around, before training, after training. And we know that that's really important, and that those who are mentally tough they will engage naturally in more mental imagery. So it's a tool that can enhance mental toughness. Sorry.
Right, absolutely. So let's talk about sport intelligence. You have a brief section in your chapter here talking about sport intelligence. Now, we often refer to game intelligence. Is that the same thing, game intelligence, sport intelligence?
Yeah, so in terms of sports intelligence, it would be an understanding about tactics, understanding your role, understanding how the team works best together. So, it would be, I'm assuming, if that's what your game intelligence is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And how does that relate to mental toughness?
Yeah, we know that, there's a study by Jacari in 2008 found that those who are mentally tough actually have higher levels of sport intelligence, or sport intelligence is associated with mental toughness, which I thought is quite interesting, really, because they are quite different concepts. However, having this sport intelligence would probably allow you, or explains why certain individuals can then perform well under pressure. So we know that mental toughness is about performing well under pressure, not letting your performance dip under pressurized situations. Then if you think about it, if you've got higher levels of sport intelligence, so you know things in more depth, you're fully aware of tactics, of all different strategies, you have a deep understanding of those, that when the pressure comes on, because your levels of intelligence, or sport intelligence, game intelligence, is so high, it's less affected by any distractions that you have, which then enables you to perform well under pressure. That's how I would kind of see it when just thinking about it now.
So is that sounds like closely related to the ability for performers to put their attention or their concentration on the right things at the right time. We talk about that a lot, Adam, in law enforcement training, is when we see expert performers in policing, it's because they have a high degree of game intelligence. They are actually anticipating the future. They're being able to read things extremely quickly, gate out the irrelevant stimulus that's not important, and focus on the things that are. So do you think that it is that ability to anticipate, to have expectancies on what's likely going to occur, and have that focus and concentration? Is that the relationship here between sport intelligence and mental toughness?
Yeah, anticipation is really important, as is a person's ability not to be distracted by irrelevant or task irrelevant thoughts, and focus on what is relevant and do that quickly. And that's why I think mental toughness can develop over time, and through training, that's why people can get better, because we can develop their intelligence, their game intelligence, or their sport intelligence through coaching and the way in which they're taught. And you'd expect that's linked into this ability to be able to maintain and enhance and thrive under pressurized situations. Right.
No, that makes sense. And so, like you've spoken about feedback a few times. So what I'm wondering, so there's a couple of different ways I think I look at this. I can create a training environment, a practice environment, and put my people in it and make it as contextual as possible, as realistic as possible, and I put pressure on them, so they come in and they perform, and they have these productive, healthy struggles and overcome problems and adversity in training. And I understand that. And then I also see another category, which is now I, as the coach, am going to step in and provide some kind of feedback to my people. And it seems to me the feedback process is also very important. And what does that feedback look like? And in order to make it constructive and lead to more of that, like you said, that mastery state, that self-reference, intrinsic motivation. So what do we understand about the types of feedback that a coach provides as it relates to mental toughness?
Yeah, so feedback in all walks of life is really, really important. And I think it starts with, if we're looking at, we know that that mindfulness behaviour from a coach is linked to mental toughness, that it starts with your mannerisms, your body language, your tone of voice, how quickly you speak. They're all really important because, for one, it facilitates or it determines the extent to which a person will understand what you're saying. And then also, as well, if we look at mindfully, it's about how are you delivering that message. You know, does the person feel like it's coming from a good place? So they're the basic things when thinking about how do I deliver feedback. Is thinking about your communication, thinking about your body language. And then it's about what does the person need to do to improve on? What aspects of their performance have any of them deteriorated, declined? What have they improved on? What do they need to improve on further? What do they need to work on further? So all of this is very much self-reference. It's about this mastery climate and delivering that feedback in a way which is about them improving. So it's very much constructive. I do think you need to be honest. I think it's vitally important. This isn't a kind of soft approach. It's about honesty and it's vitally important. If someone's performance is below what you'd expect them to be at a certain time, then it's about identifying some of the reasons why. But you're doing it in a way that's self-referenced. So is it that they've always been bad at a particular area, or is this just this happened recently? But then about breaking down what they can do to make or to try and improve within a particular area, or an area that they've got weakness in. Because I'm guessing you'll have certain minimum standards for across lots of areas, and which is difficult because in some ways that does promote this performance environment where you think, I need to get to this minimum standard, which then is about, it detracts from this mastery climate. And as coaches, it is it's a tightrope to walk sometimes, but the feedback should always emphasise improvement and what they need to do to improve. And I guess really important is how they do that. So developing a plan of what they can do to make the improvements that you feel would be necessary as a coach or as a leader or as a trainer.
And how does all that relate to, you talk about optimism and pessimism and the importance of enhancing optimism and reducing pessimism in your athletes, your students.
Yeah.
So is that also related to how you provide feedback and the type of feedback, the content of it, the culture of training, or how do we understand, like, why is creating enhancing optimism and reducing pessimism important as it relates to mental toughness?
Yeah, again, in this 2008 study, we found a high correlation between individuals who are mentally tough and optimistic, and then an inverse link. So those who scored low on mental toughness were much more likely to score high on pessimism. And the reason why pessimism is quite a negative construct is that people think that when they're performing poorly, that these performances permanent, so that they'll never ever be able to get better, and they think it's something that will continue throughout the rest of their life. And also they think that if they get negative feedback, individuals who are pessimistic take it personally. Oh, he doesn't like me. He's only saying this because he doesn't like me. And so it's kind of it's a negative mindset in the sense that it's not related, it's not associated with well-being and also high levels of performance. So whereas optimism, people believe that if things don't go as well one particular day, they don't think it's permanent, they don't think it'll last forever, they think that they can improve and that they will get better. So for these reasons, it's important to have that optimism mindset as well. And another thing as a role of a coach is that your role is sometimes to dispute the way in which a person may feel. So, for example, a person might feel they're really bad at a particular task, and they'll say, oh yeah, I can never do this, I'm not good at this. Well, you as the coach, as a leader, dispute that and say, no, actually, you have shown you can do this. I've got every confidence that if you make this minor adjustment, you will be very good at this. So you're disputing this negativity, which then helps. And then you can use evidence, so provide performance metrics to back up your argument and to dispute that any maybe negative thoughts that they have, which can then all lead to enhancing optimism. So it's quite important that we can try and enhance optimism, and it's all it is linked to performance, particularly in sport anyway.
Right, absolutely. And so that seems to me to also be tied back again to this whole creating a mastery climate versus a performance climate in this regard. And I kind of, maybe I'm wrongly tying concepts together here, but I'm thinking of the work of like Carol Dweck on growth mindset, and how people who have a growth mindset, when they look at their mistakes, their errors, and their struggles, they love those environments because they feel that that's where they're doing their best work, is in the struggle. And I see that as being that optimistic mindset. It's how they interpret their circumstances versus, like you said, the pessimistic mindset is, you characterize yourself by your performance, and that is, so when I make a mistake, I'm a failure, right? And so it becomes who you are, rather than looking at an opportunity for enhancement, for improvement, for outcomes. So am I wrongly conflating concepts here? Or?
No, I think, so I've been doing psychology now for 20 years, and I think the more you hang around, the more you see a bit of rebranding going on, or similarity between constructs. Right. So mental toughness, resilience, hardiness, they're all very similar. And now you just, optimism, pessimism, and growth mindset, there's loads of similarities. I see it all the time. And, I'll read about a new construct and you think, that's not actually that new, that relates to this, this and this. So sometimes it's just a rebranding or rebadging, but I think they're highly related and very, very similar, if not the same thing. Carol Dweck might argue different, because people do, but in the reality of it is that they're similar, they're the same maybe.
Right. But so then that optimistic sort of mindset and the mastery climate that we want to obtain, like when you say the importance of providing a pressure environment, and then what we know is, as soon as we put pressure on people, because people, in my experience, as a law enforcement trainer, is officers love to perform to their strengths. So when we create an environment where they can just go along and they can look really good and feel really good because they're performing at their strengths, but they never go into those areas where they need to improve and their areas of weakness. But when you put people in pressure and force them to go into those dark areas where they don't want to go, then and they start to struggle and make mistakes, you start to see pretty quickly whether they're optimistic or pessimistic people. It's how do they view those challenges. But I always think like the trainer, the coach, has a very important role to play in how, like you said, the language that you use to set up the drill, the practice, whatever it is, the culture that you have around like psychological safety to push yourself, so you don't belittle your people, you don't make them feel embarrassed in front of their peers, all that kinds of things when they struggle, and that you as the trainer model humility in that regard, right? So that you don't put yourself on a pedestal like you're some different category of human being than your students are.
Yeah, I think all of that is vitally important, and this is why you get back to this mastery climate, is that you're focusing on improvement. And for some people, and as a trainer, as a leader, you will say that you've all got different strengths, you've all got different weaknesses. Some of you in certain skills are high and others, and what we're looking to do is to create more of an all-round person, individual, and that involves you working on your weaknesses and just explaining that just generally as humans, we would always like to do things that we're good at, and the things that we're maybe not as good at, we don't tend to do them. But in certain situations, we have to work on these other things, and maybe explaining why it's important, understanding that everyone's different strengths and weaknesses, and the key is to work on building your weaknesses, improving your weaknesses, and like you say, doing that in a not. I really dislike when coaches and leaders criticise people in front of a group. I think I don't think it serves any purpose, and so by not doing that and supporting individuals, they'll feel less pressure when they're working on things that they're not as good at, because they're not going to feel as judged and as pressurised by what the leader's going to say if they're going to get shouted at or heavily criticised. And actually it gives them a safe space to work on things they're maybe a bit less comfortable with a view to bringing them up in all areas, so that then you can then, once they are better in their weak areas, they can then start enhancing the pressure again. And it just leads to, I think, a more higher levels of performance under pressure, which is sustained over time.
Right. And so we're rapidly coming up on an hour already. I can't believe the time has flown so fast. So in the time we have left, what I would really like you to talk about, Adam, is at the end of your chapter on mental toughness training, you talk about ways that coaches can teach athletes mental skills, and you identify 4 different aspects. You talk about coping effectiveness training, appraisal training, concentration, and goal setting. So can you just go through those and so help us understand what they are and ways that trainers can incorporate these 4 aspects into their training environment?
Yeah. So and actually, I do have a separate chapter on 3 of the 4, coping effectiveness training. So coping relates to the way in which we manage stress, how we reduce stress, and that can be managing our internal responses to stress, so our negative emotions, or trying to alleviate the stress if it's an external stressor. So it might be things such as our maybe lack of conditioning, our poor performance in an area. That will be considered an external stressor. And the premise of coping effectiveness training is about teaching people to become better at alleviating stress, whatever that source of stress is. That's the premise behind it. And the way in which you do that is you match the coping strategy to the type of stressor. This is in a nutshell. So, for example, what we do in this type of training, you teach people about understanding the differences between controllable and uncontrollable stressors. And then you align the different type of coping strategy with that. So an example being, if it's a controllable stressor, you would use problem-focused coping. So you would use strategies at alleviating and getting rid of the stressor. So, for example, a lack of conditioning, fitness condition. Right, so I can control that. So I would use problem-focused coping strategies. So time management, working out when I can fit extra sessions in, speaking to a conditioning coach, information seeking, goal setting, setting myself some goals. And then just quickly, with uncontrollable stressors, so things that other people do, you would use emotion-focused coping. You can't control what other things that are beyond your control, but you can look at controlling your emotional responses via regulating your emotions. And then appraisal training. So this is about how you evaluate stressful situations. And there are 2 main ways. We can view them as a challenge or as a threat. And when we're viewing a situation as a challenge, we perceive that we have the resources to be able to cope with it. So again, it links into coping. But also you're focusing on what can be gained from a situation, whereas with a threat, you're focusing on what would go wrong, what other people may think of you. You're focusing on negative outcomes of a situation. And this is really, really important because we know that more mentally tough people will generate a challenge appraisal. And the reason why that is linked to performance is that when it affects your psychophysiological state, it affects your cardiovascular system, in the sense that when you experience a challenge state, your blood vessels dilate, and so they can flow around your body, flow to your brain, flow more effectively to the muscles that are needed for sustained performance. Whereas when you have a threat state, they constrict. So actually, blood tends to focus more on your organs, and it can't go to your brain, or goes less to your brain and the muscles. So that's why it inhibits performance, and that's probably why mental toughness is linked to this challenge state. And then concentration is our ability.
Adam, can I just add? Sorry, just
yeah,
before
sorry,
you go on,
yeah.
brother. No, you're saying some stuff here that's really connecting some things in my mind here. So this threat versus challenge state, there's a video, viral law enforcement video. Of course, they always go viral, right? The ones, but it was really interesting to me. It was a incident on a public street where one male was acting extremely in a violent way, physically violent. There were 4 or 5 police officers there, and what this video shows is that as this individual expresses his violence, 4 of the officers, I think it was 3 or maybe 4 of the officers, they basically had an aversive reaction to his violence. They turned their back on him. They tried to get away from the individual. They actually tried to run away from him. Some of them fell down. And then there was this one officer who you see him come in, and he is fully engaging. He's moving forward. You can just see his focus and the officer's level of confidence as he moves forward and deals with this threat. And I thought, as you're talking about threat versus challenge states, I'm thinking, to me, there it was, as it played out in that incident there.
Yeah.
So like you said, this is really important. It can completely drive how an officer performs under those high pressure situations. Am I in a threat state where I don't have self-efficacy, I don't believe I have the tools to solve the problem, and so I try to avoid the threat, versus being in a challenge state where you lean into it and this is a problem to be solved.
Yeah, absolutely. And you'd imagine that those maybe backing away were thinking about what could go wrong. He could attack me, I could get hurt. Whereas the other individual is like, I'm going to accomplish this, I'm going to disarm him or do what I need to do. And so he's focusing on kind of the positive outcome, believing that he can do that. So yes, that is a really great example of probably those states that they were experiencing and manifested in the behaviours. And they are definitely linked to behaviours, definitely.
And these are something that can be trained, correct? So the learning environment can help with that.
Yeah, so in the book there's a chapter on appraisal training, how we can manipulate challenge states and how we can reduce the prevalence of threat states. And they're based on, they're research based, so they're definitely things we can do. If you think about it, a lot of these psychological constructs, they all link in. When we do research, we see, this is a coping paper, this is a mental toughness paper, this is an appraisal paper, but actually they all tie in and relate to performance. It's just, I don't know, probably for the convenience of research, we tend to explore them separately at times, and then we do look at links between them. But they all do link in.
Okay, sorry to interrupt you. You were moving on to concentration before I broke yours.
No. The concentration then. I think really good ways of enhancing concentration are the use of cue words. And so concentration is about our ability to focus on task-relevant thoughts and not be distracted. And when working with athletes, and there's some good evidence about the use of cue words, and that can be It's essentially their key words. It could be something, a mindset set that you want to have. So you might be, I'm confident or focused, or it could be a technical word or cue word, and you would repeat these to yourself. So it's kind of like they're often used in pre-performance routines. There's lots of evidence to support the use of these within pre-performance routines as a way of enhancing concentration, and I guess importantly, performance under pressure. So they reduce the likelihood of choking under pressure. And then finally, goal setting. So I think we've touched upon this. It's about setting standards that you or goals that you would like to achieve within the future. And we know that goals should be self-determined. So as a coach or as a leader, you don't impose the goals. Yes. What goals would you like to set? What sort of standards do you want to achieve? And I think, again, they should be self-referenced, so they focus on yourself and what you want to improve on and the standards of performance that you want to get to, as opposed to, a goal of mine is to be in the top 50%. Well, it should be about setting a standard that you want to get to, and then by doing so, that probably would get into the top 50%. But your focus should be on setting goals that relate to yourself and improvement, rather than other people, because we can't control other people. We can only control what we do in our own goals, and that it just reduces anxiety, reduces cortisol. So that's probably the reason why we want self-reference goals.
So in that goal setting you mentioned earlier, a reality in law enforcement training is we do have standards and minimum standards, but I think, Adam, maybe sometimes the mistake that we make is we get our people to focus on meeting an external minimum standard, which is now it's not an intrinsically motivated improvement goal. It's I just have, once I get to the minimum standard, I'm good. that's
absolutely,
my goal. Where really I would think that it would be much better to actually have your people create, like you said, there's their own self-organized performance goals that they want to meet, and I think you will actually surpass minimum standards when people are intrinsically motivated for that improvement. So what do you think about that?
Absolutely, and we know that there's evidence to show that. And if you think about it as well, if your goal is just to get to a minimum standard, if you fall short of that, then you're probably just going to miss out. Whereas if you're encouraging people to set their own goals, they're actually going to have more engagement, more desire to achieve them, and they're probably much more likely to perform higher, which then will create potentially more well-rounded law enforcement officers. Because then you don't just have like a bunch of them who are meeting a minimum standard in everything; they're surpassing in lots of them.
Right. I sometimes like to say that minimum standards equals minimal performance.
Absolutely. Well, it does though, doesn't it? It does. It really does. Minimal expectations as well.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, we've been going for an hour, Adam. Is there anything that you wished I would have asked you, sir, or you want to add on to mental toughness training before we close our conversation?
I'm sure, like always, I'll think about something at probably 3 o'clock in the morning when I wake up. I should have said that. But no, I think we've covered a good that kind of basic understanding of what it is, how it can be developed, how constructs link to it. So no, I think hopefully your listeners will find that of use. Right,
and this was just dipping our toe into the water, so to speak, on this topic. Yeah. And I would strongly encourage, Adam. I should show you your textbook. You probably wouldn't like what I've done to it, but I've got it dog-eared and highlighted and notes written through it, and all that to say you've done a yeoman's job of bringing so many of these concepts, human performance concepts around the psychology of athlete and performance, into this book in very practical, understandable ways. So I would encourage listeners, if you want to dive deeper and get a really good understanding of these principles, to get Dr. Nichols, Psychology in Sports Coaching, Theory and Practice, 3rd edition, published by Routledge Press. It will be of great value to you in continuing to enhance your training practices. So, Adam, thank you so much, my friend, for the time, and wish you all the best in your BJJ competition coming up next month.
Yeah, nice one, Chris. Great to speak to you as always. Thank you.
Well, we hope that you've enjoyed this episode of the Trainer's Bullpen. And as always, our encouragement to you is that you would reflect deeply about the critical aspects of this interview and how you can apply the principles that you heard to advance your training and make your students more effective and adaptive performers in the real world. As a reminder, all of the research papers, as well as the other links, are available to you over at the Trainer's Bullpen website at trainersbullpen.com. Thank you for your dedication to advancing officer and public safety.